Good morning, Shawn, and thank you for joining us on the show today. I know you've just had a cold, so I'm thankful for your time. Now, I know we're going to be talking about a lot today, everything from your personal journey with CFS and your thought, as well as your thoughts on psilocybin and the state of the longevity industry as a whole. Before we get into that, though, would you mind quickly introducing yourself to the audience for us? To be honest, I don't think it's probably necessary, but there are always going to be a few people who are new to the scene and maybe aren't familiar with you. So if we could just dig a bit deep into your story. I know out of uni you started out in the product formulation space where you were pretty successful, and then you ran into a series of health issues, and that you were ultimately diagnosed with what I believe was a pituitary adenoma. But if you could just walk us through that, I'll shut up and let you get into it.
Yeah, you did it correctly. You know me well. I have had a slew of health issues, in particular autoimmune issues. As you mentioned, chronic fatigue syndrome, Hashimoto's, Epstein-Barr, fibromyalgia. At one point, I couldn't get out of bed for about 6 months. Like literally, it was a struggle to just crawl to the bathroom. Which led to me really pushing down this path with a much greater fervor to understand what was going on with me and solutions for a way out, which led me to keto, paleo, intermittent fasting, immune health supplements, mitochondrial health, and all the things that I've become so passionate about. I did have a brain tumor at one point. Luckily non-cancerous, but it did cause a number of endocrine issues, severe headaches, etc. And then my accomplishments is I've written a best-selling book called The Energy Formula. It's an international bestseller. It was listed on Forbes and USA Today's top 20. It's just a great biohacking book, but it also addresses mental health and wellness and nootropics and supplement stacks. And I'm sure your readers would love it. It exists in Kindle, ebook, Audible, as well as softcover, hardcover. I've formulated about 1,200 supplements. I have a formulation company called Zone Halo Formulations. Worked with hundreds of companies across the industry, some multi-billion-dollar companies. I've spoke on stage in about 35 different countries, and I've patented about 40 unique ingredients, which we're going to talk about today. Some of those things like paraxanthine, beta, ergothionine, exogenous ketones, dihydroberberine. There's a ton of ingredients that I've worked on, dileucine, and I'm sure we'll get into some of them today. Probably lastly, and maybe most importantly, I battled mental health issues. I had trauma and abuse early in my life, and I really dealt with chronic anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. And psychedelics is something that I have become a big proponent of. It helped guide me through some really dark chapters to where I love my life. I'm proud of my life, proud of my accomplishments. I've found new love and family in ways I never thought possible. My businesses have 10x'd. Like, I'm just so grateful that I had those tools. And so that's something I speak on, as well as the science of depression, the science of psychedelics, and mental health and wellness issues.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I was fortunate enough to be able to watch your presentation with Mind Valley just regarding the psilocybin journey. And it was amazing. I'd love to talk about ketones and maybe out the scope of this particular interview, but that's what I did in most of my postgrad stuff, and was looking at the effect of BHB esters on the NMDA receptor and how that can affect depression outcomes. I mean, ketones by in of themselves are just an amazing molecule. So, but yeah, maybe we'll have to have round two at some point. Just taking a step back quickly, the adenoma, the pituitary adenoma. How did you first find out about the presence of that? Did you have an elevated prolactin or?
Yeah, my prolactin was sky high. My testosterone was in the double digits. My free testosterone was basically non-existent. My beta estradiol, my estrogen, was extremely high. So I started just getting really skinny fat. Um, my body composition was radically changing. Like I said, I started getting really bad headaches. I felt fatigued all the time. I felt a pressure behind my eyes. And that led to looking at my hormones, seeing prolactin was very high and testosterone was very low and beta estradiol very high. And then that led them to do a CT scan of the brain, and we saw the pituitary adenoma and treated it with cabergoline, as well as TRT and exemestane to address a number of those hormonal issues. I don't take any of those anymore. It seems that I've been able to control it at this point. So, yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. You didn't actually have the adenoma removed. You're just hormonally controlling it. Is that correct?
Yeah, if I keep dopamine fairly high, then I do well. So I tend to stay on dopaminergics. Things like actually my ingredient paraxanthine, a metabolite of caffeine, is highly dopaminergic. Um, Tyrosine, which I'm a big fan of, it lights me up. I take a gram or two of tyrosine itself, and I feel amazing. So just keeping the dopaminergics fairly high. There's a really interesting experimental ingredient nootropic that I've been playing with called 9-MBC, and I'm a big fan of that one as well.
Oh no, that's fascinating. It's amazing that you've been able to make so much progress without necessarily going down the surgical route. Well, thank you for that intro, Shawn. I know it's not easy being that vulnerable, and I appreciate your candidness. Again, I know we could dissect that five ways till Sundays, but I suppose really maybe where we could start off with is having a discussion around psilocybin, both with your experiences and thoughts. Now, I suppose, yeah, again, how it really helped you, and then again, how you see it maybe beyond its scope of not scope, but how it could be useful potentially beyond just being a mental health aid. I have some thoughts about how one might conceivably look at it as a longevity molecule. Maybe we could chat about those in a bit. But uh, what was your journey with psilocybin like?
Massive. I think it's of all the entheogens and psychedelics, it's pretty gentle. I think it would be less intense than something like 5-MeO or ayahuasca and some of these kinds of things. Um, I certainly believe in any of these compounds not being used recreationally, ideally, but used in a facilitated setting. And for me, that was the case. And I was able to go deeply into the psilocybin space. And for me, everything shifted. I didn't know I could be loved and have love in an unconditional way. For me, as a wounded type A, I was driving, I was building, I was never looking back, and nothing was ever good enough. I kept climbing. Whatever the next rung on the ladder was, there was no joy at any level. Um, and I believe that people could like me, congratulate me, but I also believe that that could go away at any second. That if I was not doing enough, accomplishing enough, making myself of value enough, then I didn't have worth. And that was very difficult. The abuse I put myself through for 40 plus years. And so getting in this space and feeling that, oh my goodness, I can be loved, I can have love, love can be unconditional, I can love myself, I can be a human being, not just a human doing. And I have worth whether I'm doing nothing or not. I can be loved whether I'm doing nothing or not. I can just be loved for me. And I can also take a breath and chase what lights me up instead of chase what gives me the most likes, what gives me the most money, what gives me the most attention. I can do things for myself and not just for others to earn their love. And this was a profound pivot for me. It sounds like something that you could rationalize very easily if someone was telling you these things. But it's a whole different thing when you anchor it in your heart and in your soul and you feel it, and you feel it throughout your nervous system. And that trauma was stored in my nervous system, was stored in the constructs and the beliefs and how I acted day to day. And to release those things, you could just see it in my face. You could feel it with my ease. You could hear it in my voice that I released this traumatic construct, these traumatic ideas. And I felt better. I slept better. I had a whole new lease on life. I had deeper friendships. I was more passionate at work. Everything shifted.
Yeah, and that's incredible, and there's definitely some parallels there that I can relate to. Not obviously get into specifics of it, but something that I've struggled with, and maybe you can relate to this, is this inability to feel loved. Were you able to identify? Can you identify that? And did you find psilocybin, the therapy, the uh, the therapy with psilocybin was able to resolve any of that?
It absolutely was the first journey I went on, the first experience, facilitated experience, um, gave me a deep sense of God's love, uh, universe love, love of myself, love of people around me in a way that I hadn't accepted. I when you believe that you're not worth loving, when you live in that space, you cannot give a deep enough love, and you can certainly not receive love in a way that is as deep as it possibly could be. There's a barrier to intimacy. So these constructs were preventing me from experiencing love. I was literally created barriers, even though it was the one thing I truly wanted. And when you're in the psilocybin space and some of these other entheogens, potentially, it can melt that default mode network, turn off those barriers, melt those constructs,
The
and have
dissolution of the
you
ego.
dissolution of the ego and have you in a highly neuroplastic space where you can create new synapses, new connections, create new neural wiring that can rewrite that code. You're essentially going into the operating system and cracking open the computer case and just uh, rewriting that code. And that is profound in a way that I struggle to see how therapy itself, and that's a controversial statement, but I believe this because if you're not like when we're depressed, default mode network is higher than it normally is. When we're depressed, we're almost no neuroplasticity. We stay in loops. When we're depressed, all the neurotransmitters are turned down, so we feel less. And this is a protective mechanism. When we're in the entheogen space, all those neurotransmitters are turned up globally. That neuroplasticity is turned up globally. There's more blood flow to the brain. Default mode network is turned off. Neuroinflammation is turned down. Like and then anything is possible. That idea that you've been skiing down the same ski slope and there's tracks and you're following those tracks because you've always followed those tracks, and it makes the most sense because the tracks are there before you. And so you'll keep following those tracks. Whether or not it's the most ideal way for you now, it's the most enjoyable way down the mountain, it's the fastest way down the mountain. You don't know. You just know there's tracks there. But when you can throw fresh powder over the trail and then recreate your way down the mountain, that's a game changer.
No, it definitely is. And I loved what you said about therapy. I think therapy obviously has its place, but it's so one-dimensional. I mean, how many people do you know, I'm sure, who have been in therapy for 20 years and who've made absolutely zero progress? And you just look at it objectively and think, well, at some point you've actually got to take a step back and say, is this really working? And I think what psilocybin and other psychedelics do so effectively is they bridge that gap between the physical, the spiritual, metaphysical, and the emotional. And I was listening, ironically enough, to Dr. Daniel Arman, who you're obviously familiar with this morning on Chris Williamson's podcast, talking about how, so much mental health is actually sort of a brain health issue first and foremost. And what I love about psychedelics is, as I've just alluded to, and as you alluded to, is they're able to sort of bridge this gap between the physical dysfunction in terms of rewiring so many of these sort of dysfunctional synaptic pathways in the brain, and then also allowing you to process that whatever trauma or issue is going on in your life. I think it's incredible, and it's an effective way of doing it too. You don't have to sit there and try and work through complex sessions where you're processing a lot of emotion. Anyway, before I got into that rabbit hole, how did your sessions sort of work with psilocybin? I assume you didn't do 5-gram herodoses from the get-go.
I did, actually. I did.
Okay, fair enough.
It wasn't my intention, but they kind of upped my dose during this experience because I felt safe. I was in an environment where that was the other thing that was so profound for me, is that I was in a cuddle puddle on the floor, where you have blankets and pillows, and I was just going deep internally. But people were holding space for me, and that was what was so profound. I'm like, I didn't know. A lot of these people in this room, by the way, this was like a group journey situation with about 20 people. Most of them were doing lighter doses, but a lot of them were celebrities and people I admired. But most of them did not know who I was at the time. And I had all of these people that were surrounding me, holding space for me, laying next to me, asking me if I needed anything. And I kept wrestling with it for several hours. Like, why are they doing this? They don't know who I am. They don't know the value I can bring to them. Why would they be kind? Why would they go out of their way in their experience to hold space for me, to help me? And it just finally broke me open. I'm like, because they just want to be kind, because you deserve love, because you're going through something deeply, and they want to be the change. They want to be the change that they want to see in the world. And so they want someone to hold space for them, so they're going to hold space for me. And that was massive for me, massive.
Yeah, I grew up in South Africa, and there's for the most part anyway, and there's a word for that called Ubuntu. You may have heard of it.
Yes, I put it in my book. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Sort of humanity to others. It's an incredibly sort of powerful term that encapsulates, I suppose, everything you've just said. Shawn, I'd love to maybe talk about what you feel are maybe some of the physical sort of mechanisms or underpinnings behind psilocybin, and what you and whether you think or not it has potential beyond just being a mental health compound. I mean, the way I see it, anything that sort of rewires the central nervous system to the point where you're going to have a proper functioning vagal nerve and subsequently a more effectively firing limbic system and an amygdala is going to have a trickle down effect on the immune system, and you're going to have lower levels of these pro-inflammatory cytokines that I know everybody is very familiar with after having gone through COVID. Do you think that there is scope for utilizing a compound like this in diseases like CFSME or inflammatory autoimmune conditions where there is just that sort of that constant hyperarousal of the CNS?
I do. I do believe that. I do believe that a lot of people are in fight or flight. I believe that people are in that sympathetic nervous system with poor vagal tone. I was one of those people that were hyper vigilant, um, essentially just looking for how to survive from moment to moment, thinking everyone and everything is a threat to my well being. And that's exhausting in terms of ATP and energy utilization and these energy systems. But certainly on a nervous or electrical system, uh, like globally scenario as well. So, it's taking a toll on you. And this is where Dr. Joe Dispenza, Dr. Bruce Lipton talk about these things being stored in the body as disease. So over time, your suppression doesn't equal dissolution. The suppression equals storing it away as disease. So to not deal with these emotions, I love the movie Inside Out, by the way, because it talks about you recognize the emotion, you thank the emotion, you give it its space, and then release it. And this is what we should do with emotions that come up, and most certainly trauma as well. We need to deal with these traumas and move on from them as best we can, but certainly not in a suppressive or kind of self-gaslighting kind of way, but acknowledging it, dealing with it, going deep with it, recognizing the lessons it's giving you, being thankful for it, and then just moving on from it.
Yeah, it's one of my greatest ambitions. I'm sure you're familiar with Dr. Robert Naviaux, who's sort of coined a lot of the work around cell danger response theory. The idea that mitochondria, when they're in a stress state, adapt to a state of lowered ATP output. And I just am adamant that by regulating, and Dr. Naviaux has done a lot of research looking into regulating the CNS with various therapies. I think he's worked with, it's gone straight out of my head, the gentleman who put together trauma release exercises, for example, that I'm sure you're familiar with, David Baselli. But I'm sure I'd love to see how a compound such as this would improve mitochondrial function directly just by way of sort of improving vagal nerve tone.
Well, along those lines, Rob, this is why I recommend adaptogens so deeply. Certainly going into a facilitated journey, but also just in general. I love these compounds that are bimodal in terms of enhancing resilience because it's enhancing you. So therefore, it will help with better sleep and better energy. It will help to normalize your functions across the body because it's increasing what's called your allostatic capacity, and therefore your capacity to have more of an allostatic load. And that just means that you can handle more stress in your stress bucket. Your bucket is bigger, so to speak. So you can deal with more mental and physical stress. So I love the adaptogens, things like ginseng, ashwagandha, rhodiola, maca, most of the functional mushrooms are like that. And certainly, potentially, a number of the psilocybin mushrooms would be like that as well. So, huge fan of the adaptogens.
Yeah, no, they're incredibly powerful. I'm always slightly concerned about and I think there's a bit of an old wives' tale there about some of the issues with 5-alpha reduction and things like lion's mane and ashwagandha for that matter. I don't know outside of Reddit. There's not much data on it that's been peer reviewed to show that this is really is an issue. But do you have any thoughts there, just with
It's
regards to?
possible. Lion's mane is probably not my favorite in terms of neuroplasticity. Actually, a compound called 7,8 dihydroxyflavone seems to be the most potent, and potentially its metabolite called 4-dimethylamino, or DMA, 7,8 dihydroxyflavone. I know that sounds like a lot, but you can get both of these compounds on sites like Nootropics Depot. I know has them. You're starting to see 7,8 dihydroxyflavone in some more mainstream companies' products. The 4-DMA is probably more gray market, and you won't see that. But those are more potent for neuroplasticity than a lion's mane. When it comes to adaptogens, probably my favorite by far and away is rhodiola, and in particular, a pure salidroside, which is the compound that is the active in rhodiola. It's not really the rosavins, it's the salidroside. And so if you can get a pure fermented salidroside, that's probably my most favorite.
Yeah, no, rhodiola is amazing, and I know for DMA, I think you mentioned. I believe that's available on Sounds.bio for anyone who is interested. But yeah, no, they are incredible compounds. Um, yeah, no, I definitely think psilocybin as a whole needs to be explored beyond just its mental health use cases, should we say. And I'm sure there's a synthetic chemist out there who can whip up the metabolites and formulate them accordingly.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't know about you, but we didn't do too much organic chem out in school when I was doing my biochem. So I'll have to leave that to somebody with more organic experience. But anyway, Shawn, I'd love to sort of maybe start to say, excuse me, to segue into talking about some supplements in a second. But first, I'd like to get your take on the longevity industry as a whole. Now, I'm a little bit of a cynic, and I feel almost every influencer out there sort of, no matter what their message, they always seem to come back to center. So you've got your Brian Johnsons, who obviously is the king of biohackers currently, and is doing things like working with that company Minicircle and altering his DNA with Clotho, and what's the other compound they Follostatin, I think they're trying to alter. And then you've got guys like Paul Saladino on the flip side who tell you that Kel's going to kill you if you look at it for too long. What I find, though, is that most of them, whenever they start talking about longevity, no matter what their sort of their niches, they always come back to the basics. So, and they agree on the basics. So sleep, community, a whole food diet of one sort or another. I'd love to know where you stand on this through this sort of longevity perspective. Of course, we share a bias in the sense that we believe that nutraceuticals are effective. But do you feel people who are trying to optimize for longevity get caught up in the minutiae of these compounds and biohacks when they're still maybe not getting the basics into place?
Yes, I do. And the book, The Energy Formula, by the way, is 6 pillars. So it's experiment, like as in knowing where your baseline is and testing, and even testing what works for you, just in terms of journaling and keeping track of these kinds of things, food diaries as best as possible. And I walk through that. Then nutrition, like you said, the basis is whole food. Yes, you can go into Mediterranean or keto or some of these other kinds of things, even carnivore, as you mentioned, Paul Saladino, but the basis is definitely whole food. Everyone agrees on that. Then exercise, a core component of longevity, mental health, well-being, etc., is certainly a number of forms of exercise, including resistance training and just cardiovascular fitness. Then there is routines, and having healthy routines from how you wake up with your morning routine. Certainly, as you mentioned, sleep hygiene, having healthy routines throughout the day. Then growth and growth mindset is the G. That gets into resilience and um, the idea of challenging the brain and keeping the brain neuroplastic, stoicism as a mentality. And then lastly, as you mentioned, your tribe, which is a hallmark of people that are plugged in, that are doing their best with their ikigai or Ubuntu, as you mentioned, are terms. Certainly, all the blue zones talk about being plugged in, having purpose and passion and community and support. And we see the number one killer really is loneliness. And so, absolutely, community is huge. So I'm a fan of all of those basics, as you say. And then, of course, I mentioned, because I'm the supplement guy, I mentioned supplement stacks in each chapter. And do I think that supplements may be over relied upon, even as a supplement guy? Yes, I do. I do think that there's no magic bullets. I do think if you're getting 3 hours of sleep but relying on supplements for anti-aging, that is a very skewed mindset. If you're getting drunk every night but taking exogenous ketones and creatine, like that doesn't make sense. Those things can have value, even if you're doing a lot of these things wrong. I'm not saying they don't have potential value to at least mitigate some of the damage you're doing, but it would make more sense to reduce the damage you're doing and live a life that's conducive to greater longevity, health, and well-being.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I just work in a supplement company myself. I get involved in a bit of customer service, and yeah, you often have to counsel customers on whether, and they'll come to you and say, well, I want to enhance my health span, more longevity. Is NMN going to do it? And you just sort of just take them through this very sort of quick process. Well, are you eating a whole foods diet? Because I promise you, if you're trying to feel better by taking NMN, it may or may not do anything, depending on a whole bunch of other variables. But if you are eating the standard uh, Western diet, because it's not American, it's Western, let's be honest, it's not going to help in the slightest. And yeah, again, everything you've just said, you have to get those basics into place before going down the rabbit hole.
Well, let me take that one step further, Rob. And this is something I've been exploring, whether we're talking about supplements or psychedelics or basically any intervention that's healthy and beneficial for you. If your nervous system, which a friend of mine, Dr. Stephen Young, likes to say electrical system because of the NLP aspects of saying nervous system, but if your electrical system or your nervous system is constantly in fight or flight, if you are constantly in sympathetic, if you are rarely getting into parasympathetic rest and digest, you're rarely getting the vagal tone that you need, then you are not in a space to utilize, to absorb, to store, to ideally use these nutrients that you're taking in, be it from food, be it from supplements, be it from entheogens or whatnot. This is the problem because you are not in that space. And so many of us are taking 100 supplements because we feel tired, we feel exhausted, we feel overwhelmed, and you're not in a space to properly utilize these things. So finding ways to get yourself into parasympathetic nervous system. Why do you think that it's been a psychosomatic anchor, a basis for like when we eat, to families pray or meditate or take a minute before they eat? They're dropping into parasympathetic, and then they're giving themselves the placebo effect, or whatever way you want to say that, of thank you for this food we're about to receive, for the nourishment of my body. What do you think that affirmation is doing? It's putting you in a space where now you're going to utilize these nutrients better. Your nervous system is in a completely different state. And why do you think they call parasympathetic rest and digest? And they call sympathetic fight, flight, or freeze? There's no resting, there's no digesting happening in sympathetic. So think about that. If you're not in parasympathetic when you're taking your supplements, when you're eating your food, you're not using it ideally. And then take that one step further, even the healthiest food that we're having. But if we're training our bodies for whenever we're having this healthy food that we're stressed or under attack, let's say we're only eating when we're driving our car, when we're at work and we're under heavy stress, now the body will shortcut and create that neural wiring to say, whenever you eat, this means you're under stress. Therefore, when you eat, it creates stress.
It's almost like a form of NLP, isn't it? You
Yes.
are teaching your body to associate an action with another action, and then that negatively has a downstream consequence, and you end up with things. Just in the eating example, I would assume that would be a perfect example of how you drive something like leaky gut. If you've got a digestive system that's compromised due to the high levels of stress, you're not going to digest that food properly. You're going to break down that epithelial lining in your gut and the mucosa, and then you go into the ingress of LPS, and Bob was your uncle, dysfunctional physiology thereafter. So yeah, no, I think that's amazing. And I just I mean, you just touched on so many good points there. Like I sort of briefly mentioned offline, I'm working through some of my own CFS types of issues, and for ages I've been sort of trying to sort of piece together, this sort of functional medicine model. And depending on who you go to, there are so many practitioners who'll sort of start off with the gut, start off with assaulting your hormones, start off detoxifying you. But I do believe, and just sort of, I've had the privilege of working with a gentleman called Justin McGuire, who's phenomenal. One day I'll be able to say that word correctly. He's a big proponent of psilocybin. I'll actually have to introduce you to him. But anyway, just working with him and realizing that if you take a CNS sort of centric focus on healing the body, whether that's through psilocybin communities, vagal nerve stimulators, breath work, stellate ganglion blocks, all of the above. I think as an individual, you are just priming your body to then actually make the most of the modalities that you're then going to use to actually try and heal the underlying dysfunction. And that's, yeah, so thank you for that. That was just an amazing add-on and something that I would have never thought to have included. So yeah. Okay, so obviously, that all being said, we are supplement guys. And at the end of the day, when just going back to the longevity side of things, I do think when looking at longevity and trying to optimize for longevity, two of the variables that one might look to as being the most important, at least physiologically, are arguably glycemic variability, so blood sugar control, and then inflammation. Now, I don't know if you agree or not, but I think that would be a pretty good place to start to then maybe get into the supplement side. But yeah, just from a physiological standpoint, could you talk us through why maybe having dysregulated blood sugar and high levels of inflammation is such a problem? Obviously, there's the the AGE side of things and all of that.
Yes, exactly. Advanced glycation end products are aptly named as AGEs. And for most, glycation is causing significant damage as a result. And when you look at glycation, that blood sugar damage, you also see increased inflammation, oxidation, dyslipidemia. Most disease, almost all disease, is metabolic in nature. And therefore, at the root of this, we can find metabolic dysfunction via high blood glucose and insulin, and then ultimately mitochondrial dysfunction with impaired energy output and the mitochondria not having enough in number and not functioning as well as they could. So having something like dihydroberberine is going to address almost all of that, which makes it profound. That's why when we look at there's massive studies on metformin going on right now with the government's funding studies of like 20,000 people. There is huge studies, and those are both AMPK activators. They both work on this blood sugar glycation pathway, anti-glycation. They both help with reducing the effect of viruses, reducing inflammation, improving dyslipidemia, etc. What I found with berberine, and even when you look up things like metformin, you see um, GI distress, you see a number of side effects. You don't see with dihydroberberine. The doses are so much lower with dihydroberberine than berberine because it has greater bioavailability, about 5 times as much bioavailability, and it lasts about twice as long in plasma. So you only need to take a small dose twice a day versus a large dose 3 times a day. You have less of that GI distress and just a greater efficacy. We also see that it increases GLP-1 pretty dramatically as well. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating compound. Could you break down what exactly it is? The difference between berberine and dihydroberberine is. I mean, uh, obviously dihydroberberine. I think your product Glucovantage. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, it's starting to pop up more, but just from a sort of a molecular standpoint, what is the difference between these two compounds?
Yeah, so berberine, when it's metabolized in the body, like at the gut level, is converted into dihydroberberine, and then at plasma level, which means in the blood, is converted back to berberine again. So what we're seeing is that there's a lot of bio-individuality, meaning we all kind of experience it different. We all metabolize it a little different based on our gut microbiome. And we're taking that part out of the equation. So we're removing the bio-individuality that it only works well for about 60% of people when it comes to berberine, that a large portion consider GI distress a big side effect. And so you're removing those pieces by going directly to the metabolite that is just cleanly going to work at the gut level and then be converted back to berberine more effectively at plasma. And again, lasting much longer in plasma than standard berberine would as well. So it's very interesting. We thought it would be better, but now we've seen it just be night and day, dramatically better than standard berberine.
Yeah, and you've actually conducted trials, I believe, where you've compared it directly against metformin. Is that correct?
Not metformin. There is a study that compares berberine to metformin, and berberine is superior. And clearly, we've compared berberine and dihydroberberine in
Okay.
studies with PK pharmacokinetics.
Yeah.
And so I guess you could extrapolate that, but um, it certainly is far superior to berberine.
Brilliant. No, well, yeah, no, I definitely agree. And just on the gut side of things, obviously, berberine is an antimicrobial compound, and it's often used in cases of, well, in various GI issues, things like various forms of SIBO, for example. You alluded to this earlier when you said the absolute dose, due to its sort of higher bioavailability, is lower. But with long-term use, is there still likely to be the potential for any GI issues, or is that not as much of a thing to worry about, perhaps?
With berberine, it's
Or
very difficult
dihydroberberine,
to.
yeah.
Okay, with dihydroberberine, we have not seen any negative impact in terms of GI distress, short term or long term. With berberine, it's very difficult to say. As you said, sometimes it can remedy GI dysfunction and dysbiosis, but then in other cases, it seems to exacerbate it. So this is where it's very confusing, and we don't know all the reasons why quite yet.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's definitely an exciting molecule. To be honest, I think sort of most of these hydrogenated derivatives in the market on the market interesting. You've got dihydroquercetin, another one. What's dihydromercetin? There are a bunch there that just show so much promise. Okay, let's move on to omega threes, which I know you have something of that you love as well. Why are you especially partial to these, and do you have any preference for DHA or EPA in particular?
That's an interesting one. People will say they're more of a fan of one or the other. I probably lean in terms of cardiovascular function, EPA, and DHA in terms of brain function and brain health. And most people talk about getting a rich source in both. I think as long as the concentration of omega 3s is high, then that would be ideal. And I like the triglyceride form in particular. Um, so for me, I think just as long as the concentration is high, because it starts getting difficult to get enough of the omega 3 fatty acids, in particular your EPA, DHA. With some of the lower concentration ones, you're going to be taking 8 to 10 grams a day, and that is too much fish oil. So for me, I would rather take a couple grams of a highly concentrated molecularly distilled version that has IFOS certification, IFOS. That's something to look for when you're getting your fish oils.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges in the industry regarding fish oils is just this issue with oxidation. I mean, we've just pulled our omega-3 product off because it failed its second oxidation test. It was from a major, well-respected supplier with a 2-year promised shelf life. It was produced probably under a blanket of argon gas. And then sort of, yeah, it first test itself through Totox value was fine. Adenosine rate, excuse me, blah. Ad, I'm not even going to try and say that again. So T-tox value was fine and it passed. And then we did a second month follow up and it failed completely. So I think sometimes I just think personally it's probably just better to sort of eat a low omega-6 diet and then just get your omega-3s from natural sources. But yeah, I suppose that's what companies like Consumer Lab are really doing. And what was the certification you mentioned? IFOS?
IFOS, yes, IFOS. That's the one you want to look for.
Okay, we'll definitely check that out. But yeah, they are definitely useful compounds in helping to sort of lower inflammation. What do you think, I suppose, about just and maybe this is a bit of an offhand question, but what do you think about just bypassing omega threes and going straight for sort of specialized pro resolving mediators, what you might call the active form of an omega three? They're obviously a bit more expensive, but I feel for the right person, they're definitely worth it.
I love these, and it's something that I've been exploring myself lately. I've been trying lately. I've been seeing incredible benefits from taking this and taking ivermectin, interestingly, just because I think there's all kinds of things that can just be lingering that, parasites. I love to have sushi. I love to have tartar. I love these kinds of raw things, and
And
I'm
after
getting
my own
ex-
heart.
yeah, and I'm getting exposed to things. So I've been playing with both of those compounds lately, and I've seen in 1 or 2 weeks' time my HRV double. So I know they're having an impact. So it's been exciting to explore that lately. I am a big fan of SPMs. I want to dive into the research even more. That hasn't been something that I've explored deeply enough. There's been so many compounds I have, but I wanted to see just off the bat if it worked for me, and it definitely worked. So that is something I will be exploring more for sure.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Do you have any sort of baselines in terms of inflammation, perhaps, that you're going to sort of test against, or are you just solely using HRV as a metric at this point?
I didn't I didn't like start it like when I had just done blood work and looked at like CRP, or, if I was in the lab looking at like IL-6 and these other things. Um, but certainly, yeah, just having the metric that I can look at day to day, HRV, it seemed dramatic where, again, that and ivermectin together were quite effective.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I suppose for the audience, we should just clarify that specialized pro-resolving mediators are basically a metabolite of omega-3s, and they include things like resolvins, protectins, myrcins, and liposins, I think they are. Anyway, they're converted from, as you know, Sean, from EPA and DHA, generally by things like LOX enzymes, 2 and 5, and maybe some others I'm not sure offhand, but generally they are far more effectively utilized by the body, because when someone is in a high sort of state of inflammation, there is going to be less of a conversion of these omega-3s to these pro-resolving mediators, these active forms of the compound that you would then want. And then really this is where the seed oil crowd is going to go absolutely nuts, because you've got a whole bunch of polyunsaturated fats in a highly oxidized and in a highly inflammatory environment, causing all sorts of potentially distress. So, yeah, I think they're amazing, and in a nutshell, that's what they are. And anyway, I know we're starting to come up on time. So what I'd love to do is just chat to you quickly about ergothionine. This isn't a compound I'm that familiar with, and I know that it's been investigated by the ITP, the Interventions Testing Program, from a longevity perspective, and that it's generally found in mushrooms, and it's a cool antioxidant. Could you sort of break down what this compound is and why you're excited about it?
So the ene part in ergothionine means it's an amino acid. It's a trace amino acid, as you talked about. It does occur in mushrooms to a low degree. King oysters tend to be the highest in ergothionine, but also it occurs in certain beans and then organ meats. What we've seen from ergothionine, Dr. Bruce Ames, probably the most famous longevity researcher, Rhonda Patrick spun out of his lab. He looked at alpha lipoic acid and acetyl L-carnitine and some of these compounds and made them quite popular. Amazing research on spin traps, which is I could go down a massive rabbit hole there. There's no real spin traps on the market yet, but ergothionine he called the longevity molecule, or the longevity vitamin. It's a vitamin potentially because we actually see that there's a deficiency that's shown for it. You have cognitive decline without enough ergothionine. We don't make ergothionine. We have to get it from the diet.
So it's
And
essential.
so it's essential, and it's very, the amount of research that's going on with ergothionine, like literally and without hyperbole, like weekly, we're seeing full studies come out on ergothionine from some of the best resources. So it's been very exciting, whether it's from the diet or from supplemental forms, and then the doses range quite a bit. But when we look at cultures that consume ergothionine across the globe, there is a straight line correlation to longevity and lifespan and even health span to ergothionine consumption. This is incredible. There is about a 7-year difference between the lowest consumers and the highest consumers of ergothionine. So this one's very impactful. This is just not like a cellular antioxidant, which we know data is fairly equivocal on. This is a mitochondrial antioxidant, which is wholly different. We also see that it has a unique transporter that it's using in the body, the OCTN1, and then also a unique storage system for it in the body. So you are evolved to use this unique nutrient that is quite profound. This is really exciting, especially for those of us that have battled mitochondrial dysfunction, which, at this point in the US, metabolic dysfunctionality, which I would argue is fairly equivalent to mitochondrial dysfunction, is around 93%. It's only 7% of the population is functioning optimally. So therefore, and that said, this is also, I would argue, an essential nutrient. And I think we'll see that happen over the next 10 years, that it will be called that and be put in multivitamins. This is one of those ones like creatine that you need to jump on for cellular energy ASAP. So ergothionine, I think, should be foundational for everyone that is listening to this or watching this.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting compound. Do you have any feeling for the mechanism there? Is there sort of any PARP1 activation or NRF2 activation going on, or?
That's a great question. The data really isn't. We are definitely seeing it affect those pathways. How exactly it's affecting it is not clear yet. There needs to be even more research. But we do know that, as I stated, that we're evolved to use it, and it is protecting the mitochondria. And what I see is that when I was taking it at these lower doses that were typical of diet, like I was taking 1 milligram, 5 milligrams, potentially 10 milligrams, which would be very high side of like the highest diet consumers, I seem to get a positive effect, but I think it's like more like a long-term effect. But much like creatine, there's, if you kind of go with this loading aspect where I was taking 25, 50, even 100 milligrams, it then became experiential, where I was actually feeling a sense of more energy. And when I travel, especially across time zones, and circadian rhythm can be impaired, I was noticing that I wasn't having the fatigue, the difficulty shifting my circadian rhythm and cellular energy. So this is one that I am excited about. And quite frankly, we've been playing with mixing it with that salidroside that I was talking about. And so high dose salidroside and high dose ergothionine for me is truly like you feel it. It's just truly experiential.
Yeah, I'm going to put in for a position at the Wells Lab. It sounds like you guys have a lot of fun there. It sounds like you're having a ball. No, it is. It's a fascinating compound, something I've kind of got to brush up on a bit. I know I interviewed Dr. Greg Potter a while back on the podcast, who is also very interested in it, and I'll probably have to pick his brain about it as well. Shawn, you've been amazing. Before I let you go, though, would it be okay if we just ran through a few rapid fire questions?
Sure, let's do it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. What's the weirdest supplement combo you've ever tried?
uh, hmm. Butyrate plus anything. This stuff, when I first started working with butyrate, before we learned how to microencapsulate it, before we put it into a triglyceride form, butyrate, which is a powerful short chain fatty acid, is what smells like puke from your stomach, or rancid milk or butter. So butyrate plus anything, when I was starting to work with it, was awful.
Fair enough. If you could only take one supplement for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh boy. And this is a tie between dihydroberberine, ergothionine, and salidroside. I would probably say ergothionine.
It's fine. We can stick them into one capsule. Nobody will know. Cool. What's the one health trend you think is total hype?
Like total BS? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much. What's overrated currently, anyway?
Quantum anything. I just feel like anytime I see the word quantum, I just know like this is just unmeasurable, complete BS.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree with you there. I want to believe that there's something there, but yeah, when somebody says they can make you feel better by activating a program that then has some sort of effect on your house 10,000 kilometers away or miles away, it seems a bit far-fetched. Cool. What's the next big supplement ingredient we'll all be talking about in 2026?
Dileucine, an ingredient I worked on that radically increases muscle protein synthesis over its standard counterpart, leucine.
You have no clue how long I've been trying to get hold of that.
It is a game changer for muscle maintenance of muscle, repair of muscle, increased strength. And when we look at longevity and health span, we see grip strength, we see muscle mass, as a result, increased bone mass, all these kinds of things impacted by the way we can keep muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown optimized.
Shawn, that was a perfect answer and a little cruel because now I want to talk about the insulinogenic properties of dileucine. However, I know you've got to run, so thank you so much. You've been an absolute star. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you, connect with what you do, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so at Shawn Wells, ShawnWells, so at Shawn Wells or ShawnWells.com. There's a free newsletter that I go over studies and trends and supplement stacks. My Instagram has great infographics and free content. Everything's free with me unless you hire me to formulate supplements. So everything I give away for free. The book is reasonably cheap, and we're coming out with a web course for the energy formula as well that I'm really excited about later this month.
That's awesome. And we'll be sure to link all of that in the show notes. Shawn, you've been a treasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. See you around.